Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Stevens, and this is the Psychology to Live By podcast. Welcome to Psychology to Live By. In this roundtable, we're going to discuss the third in a podcast series entitled Staying Composed in Disturbing Times. And joining us today, we have my extremely composed friends from Network Music, Terry McBride, Chairman and CEO, Colleen Novak, Artist Manager, and Chris Norwood, Chief Strategy Officer. But first, a summary of Part 3, Cultivating Equanimity within Everyday Life. The first two podcasts focused on more direct psychological strategies for equanimity. But the focus in this podcast is on less direct, but nonetheless very practical strategies that lead to inner calm and composure. And I broke these into four categories. Maintaining physical health and resilience, intentional information and media consumption, the active pursuit of purpose and experiences of awe, and pro-social action, compassion, gratitude and civility. So physical health and resilience via a process called state-dependent cognition predisposes the mind to be calmer and more positive. And the great thing about maintaining physical well-being is that in this way, simply being alive can be a reward in and of itself, as it creates this equanimous state of mind no matter what is happening. The second everyday practice is an intentional approach to information and media consumption. I discuss how living in a misinformation and disinformation quagmire, which is driven by outrage, hyperstimulates our negativity bias. So the antidote is to do less doom scrolling and to more proactively consume and share more helpful and more uplifting media. The third topic was intentionally seeking out purpose and experiences of awe. When we have a larger context and a larger meaningful perspective, disturbing events can be held with more equanimity. Practical strategies for finding meaning and experiencing awe in everyday life are discussed, and fortunately, opportunities for this are abundant. And finally, I explored a range of more socially oriented practices that produce equanimity, compassion, pro-sociality, gratitude, and civility. All of these create a more balanced sense of the goodness in the world, and they're all natural antidotes to the negativity bias. Although there is much to worry about in the world, it's fortunate that there are so many ways to practically nurture equanimity. And this series, hopefully, gives people a few extra practices that they can add to their well-being toolkit. And now to my composed and very convivial colleagues from Network Music. How are we all today in Canada and America? Are we well?
No complaints.
No complaints, yes. In Australia, you know, we speak in the negative when we're asked that question. We say things like, not bad, you know.
Does that mean you have to say three positive things afterwards for your
Yes, you're making reference to the research on feedback there, Terry.
I am.
Yes. I don't think we actually do that, no. Maybe we should. All right, so a longer podcast, and as I wrote it, more and more things occurred to me, and which, as I've suggested in my introduction, is a good thing because there's so many ways that one can work on one's equanimity. So who would like to start with an observation, an insight, a question, a challenge?
I'd like to nominate Chris.
Oh,
there you go. You're nominated, Chris.
lucky me. Okay. I thought that this, I thought that this was a really helpful podcast, partly because there's so many practical tools that a person can implement off of these, and none of them are also that onerous. Do you know what I mean? Like it's sort of tiny tweaks that we can take, which is just I think really really helpful. The part that like I'm fascinated by, and I wanted, and maybe this is more comment than question, but in particular with the social media stuff, um, the points that you make are certainly spot on from my perspective. And the hardest thing is the echo chamberness of it all. I think that we as humans naturally tend to believe on face value the things that agree with our pre-existing worldviews. So our brains are almost working against us, where we might see something that isn't actually designed. I think the way you put it is like inflamed or informed, right? Is it might be designed to inflame, but it's hitting all of the cues that align with our pre-existing notions, beliefs, biases. So we sort of take it as fact. And that content might not be fact-based at all, or might be partially fact-based. And so the danger here, of course, is that people think that they're being informed, but they're not. They're just finding this content that validates it, and they're like, oh yeah, this is facts that are supporting my perspective. And so I guess like, I kind of am like, is the answer really being skeptical of everything? Is it sort of assuming the worst of the content that we find in social media? The tools that you've provided here, like is this asking yourself, is this inflaming or is this informing me? I think is also really helpful. The emphasis towards more traditional long form journalism, I think is also really helpful. But I guess that question is like, should we just really approach everything with a really skeptical eye and assume the worst before we have a reason to believe it?
Yeah, this is a deep question, really, and it's one that is exercising the minds of far greater minds than mine. But I'll have a crack at it. I say somewhere there about getting a broader perspective, like trying to find a way of transcending the particulars of my view or another person's view. I think it has to your point on skepticism, I think we have to recognize the dilemma that we're all in. So it's not just the other side that is in echo chambers.
Right.
So I feel within myself a reluctance, to read stuff from different perspectives, because it creates cognitive dissonance and emotional discomfort. And I think you're right to say that it, my view is, of course, this is an evolutionarily instantiated tendency. We were designed to be in small tribes. And the history of hominids is one of basically warfare, well before Homo sapiens. And Neanderthals were as intelligent as us and bigger and stronger, but we were more warlike and more coordinated. And so what's evolved from that is a natural suspicion of the other, and there's an assumption that. And so people who look different or who we don't know or have different beliefs are naturally, we suspect they might be an enemy until proven otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lot of research. There's this great book called How Minds Change by David McCraney. Exactly on this issue is how do you, especially when people are holding fairly objectively crazy views, but they hold on to them tenaciously, and it's, what happens, I think, is the only way people, including us, can change strongly held views is by getting to know the others. So historically, trade between tribes softened the suspicions, and people then realised that they're people just like us, right? And so, but I think that skepticism is an important thing. To give it a fancy name, Chris, I would call it epistemological humility. Epistemology being theory of knowledge, But just knowing that one's views are always partial is a good start. And that's really the basis of the scientific method.
Right.
The null hypothesis, you're first looking for evidence against your assumption. And all scientific testing is based on that. So, so I think that kind of skepticism is very helpful. But I think rising above and seeing things from a bigger perspective, because you mentioned in what you said that people find facts, and they might actually be facts that support their view. And it's rare that a person's entirely wrong. And the conclusions and positions that they take from the facts, that's where we should be debating. But I remember, and Terry and maybe Colleen as well, but Chris, you're definitely the youngest here. When the internet first came along, there was a great optimism about knowledge, about having access to the world's knowledge, and it was going to liberate us from constraints. It was going to sort of usher in a new age of openness, and it hasn't quite worked out that way.
I think it did initially.
I agree.
Especially really it was first developed inside the French scholarly circles, where it was an intranet amongst all of their higher education, universities, or kind of whatever they, call it there. So I think the genesis of it was actually true. But as in any technological advance, other people look at it differently and abdicate it for their own use, right? And it's been turned into the megaphone of rage. So.
Yeah, and I mean that's interesting in itself. It's highly relevant to what's disturbing about current times. I talk about outrage as being the engine here, and because of the negativity bias, this tendency that all humans have to pay a lot more attention to the negative rather than the positive. There's plenty out there about how tying information to advertising has then meant what's going to attract eyeballs. Well, outrage. So I think the advertising model has had a huge thing to do with that change in the internet. But come back to your points, Chris. I think it's right. So we have a real dilemma here. How do we approach our own knowledge? How do we actually engage in civil dialogue with others? I think I say somewhere there, like it's okay to hate a belief, but not the person.
Right.
To have a vigorous discussion, but first the ground has to be laid of mutual respect and safety and trust. And that's what's missing. I think this lack of civility.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my favourite words these days is insouciance. Not a common word, but it carries me a lot of what's happening at the moment. Insouciance is this kind of casual disregard of others.
Mm-hmm.
And people say dreadful things online to others, but just tossing it off like it's nothing. And I think that's a in modern language, that's a microaggression. It's a carelessness with the feelings and thoughts of others. So I think civility is a very important part of this as well. Is actually we have to overcome the negativity bias and this suspicion that we have of the other, and the way to do that is via civility, politeness, respect, old-fashioned virtues. Mm-hmm. Who's next?
I can go.
Yeah, fantastic.
Sorry, I was unmuting. I think to add to that, I find it very difficult to watch what's going on in the world, and to be present, to be informed, because it's so difficult. And I think when you talked about, finding ways to do it in a way that isn't overwhelming, because I think that every day, I think I just have to turn it all off. I can't. But you have to know what's going on. You can't turn it all off. And in some ways I feel I'm very privileged to be able to have that choice. The people who don't have that choice. But I think it's really important to find ways to make it manageable, make it
Yeah.
so that you can be present, you can try to make some difference in your own way.
Yeah, there's so much there, Colleen. I have some good friends who just came back from traveling in America, and they were telling me that no one wanted to talk about current affairs. Like and there were people from both sides of the polarized divide. So I think there is this profound discomfort with what's going on and the way it's tearing apart the social fabric, and people are finding it very upsetting. And so, but as you say, it's not a solution to completely ignore the facts and to be living in sort of la la land, right? And so it's getting the balance right, and that's where I think the quality of information is very, very important. And usually, I think it has to be something that transcends the particular things. So you're getting a more a sociological perspective or a historical perspective or a larger economic perspective. So you can sort of understand the movements at a larger level. I think that's one important thing. A lot of this whole podcast series has also been about, it's amazing the difference it can make what mood you're in when you're looking at information. And so that's the practicality of changing our mental framing, practicing civility, exercising, all the things that we were talking about, gratitude practices, looking after our resilience, our physical well-being. All of these things, they change our physiological state and our mental state. And then we can look at the same facts with less upset. And I would argue in a way that's more likely to lead to some sort of action that, at least in some small way, makes the world a better place. So I think one of the deepest part of the sort of current malaise is people's passivity and inactivity and averting their eyes, as you're saying, from what's going on. I think that's a very pernicious part of this. I feel kind of blessed or honoured in a way. My profession is in that, when I do my job in a sort of okay fashion, I'm helping people. And I've noticed over the years that when it's obvious that what I've been doing is helpful, whatever's going on in my life, it just seems a little bit more bearable.
Yeah.
And I think, again, this comes back to our evolutionary origins, that we're designed to be in small groups that help each other, that cooperate, that show altruism. And when we return to that, like whether it's the local community, the local club, with friends, it gives life meaning, right? So there's no stunning answer I have here for your conundrum.
No,
Colleen.
But it's you have to think about it. It's important to recognize, privilege isn't the right word, but I think just that it's just important to be informed and to push forward.
I think so, and I can't remember where it might have been in this one, where I talk about taking the larger historical perspective, and I mentioned that book, Factfulness, and
Love that.
yeah, and there's other books in that sort of tradition. There's Stephen Pinker's The Better Angels of Our Nature, and Robert Wright's book Non-Zero, and there's a kind of theme there that you can mount a reasonable argument that historically speaking things are improving.
Yeah.
And I'd certainly prefer to be living now than in, I don't know, medieval Europe.
True.
And
Dark times.
really dark time.
Yeah.
And life expectancy, disease, violence, ignorance, So part of, I think, of the modern malaise is ironically the fact that we've had prosperity and relative peacefulness for quite a long time. And so a lot of the distress that people have at the moment is purely comparative. It's inequality and unfairness, but the absolute level of our existence is much higher than it's ever been historically. So this is a very, very human thing, and that's the other thing I think coming out of what you're saying, Colleen, is writing this particular series. It's obviously made me think a lot about what it is to be human, like about human nature, and we're a funny creature, and even when we have all the materials to be happy, we find ways to not be happy.
Absolutely.
And so again, that's another way of getting a broader context and looking at what's occurring here, and being a little bit more philosophical, I suppose.
Well, and just seeing it from somebody else's perspective, just trying to look outside of yourself.
Yeah, when people come into the therapy room, they might be behaving badly. Subjectively they're behaving badly, and I don't like the behaviour. But almost invariably, leaving aside personality disordered people, but just normal folk, I can't really think of any exceptions where the underlying needs and that are driving the bad behaviour, they're fine. A person who's insecure, they might act out in certain ways because they're trying to, get some sort of needs met, or someone who's is over controlling, they've got anxiety about control and they're trying to alleviate anxiety. There's nothing wrong with alleviating anxiety. There's nothing wrong with needing a sense of control. It's the means that people choose, right? And I think the same about what's happening at present. My brother was telling me he was on a cruise, and on these cruises you get to mix with people who you may not, actively choose in one's life, if you know what I mean. Like, and they're in close proximity, and he expressed some surprise. I think there were some people of the opposite political persuasion, and he said they were really nice people. And of course they are. We have this way in which because we don't know them, we sort of demonise them, and we hate some of their opinions, and we assume they're not like us, but they are like us, only with different views. Right. So there's a lot of work, I think, to be done in repairing the social fabric. And I think it starts one person at a time, and it starts with us.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, that would probably leave one Terry McBride.
So you've covered off some of the things that I was thinking about, but before kids, at least the second round, I used to have a morning yoga practice. And the yoga teacher would always start it with, everyone in here should be really happy. You're alive today. You're on the mat.
Yeah.
I always used to think that was a strange thing to say to people, right? But she was absolutely right. You should be happy that you're simply alive. And then the other thing that really sort of resonated with me was your two types of pleasure. Obviously, food and sex, pretty friggin' obvious. The other one was having a meaning, having a purpose, having a why. And both of the companies that I've been involved with creating, it was always started with the why. It was, if you can answer that, you've got it. And then all you need to do is imagine it. And then the journey itself is not towards that, it's actually backwards because you've already seen what it is. I just got to work your way back.
Yeah.
So I always I always find that 3-letter word to be, or 4-letter word to be, one of the best words, period. Why? And if you can have meaning, then I think you'll have more maturity. I think you have more compassion. I think you have more of almost everything that you've mentioned in this podcast. If you have a purpose.
Yeah.
Funny enough,
Okay.
even if that purpose is to rage, you'll still have a purpose. Might not be one that I have compassion for, but
Yeah, that's right. And you're right there. I mean, it's okay. There's a little wrinkle there at the end. All right,
Sure.
and I'll come to
when you get
that.
to my age, there's always a wrinkle.
Oh, more than one.
Really?
Yeah. So let's just start with the first thing. The sheer gratefulness for existence. It's a fascinating thing. I don't know if you've ever heard. I don't know what type of scientists they are, but I've heard scientists talk about the virtual impossibility of life, and that, like, they calculate the odds of life evolving, let alone our form of life, and it's vanishingly small odds.
That's probably a good thing, though.
But there is that, like, life is miraculous, and it's a great mystery, and often we squander it, and in the Buddhist tradition, and in the Stoic philosophy traditions, that there are these practices that remind one of one's mortality. And they're not morbid in that sense, that they actually enable people to live more fully. So there's a practice in Stoic philosophy of mementi mori, remember your death. And in the Buddhist tradition, there's the meditations on the stages of putrefaction of the corpse. But they're designed to remind people to live what life they have as fully as possible. And so I think that's a thread through this series, is to say, let's be careful here, that we could spend our whole life, waste our whole life with animosity and distress and upset and disillusion. What's the second thing you spoke about, Terry? Was
A 4-letter word.
I thank you. 4-letter? WHY? Anyway, yes, having a why. And I think, is it Simon Sinek talks about this in the context of organizations? I think he does. But look, one of the things that, I talked about the distinction between hedonic and eudemonic happiness, from the Greek philosophers. And the reason I think that's so relevant is that it's impossible to live a life just being happy all the time, in that hedonic sense, because there's displeasure, there's pain, there's all the stuff we've spoken about here about human nature and, conflict and aggression and greed and so on. So whatever philosophy of life we have, it's got to be also based in some sort of meaning and purpose that allows us to navigate through all the difficulties. Otherwise, we wouldn't bother. And that's the why. Now, to come to your wrinkle, Terry, it's an interesting one. It gave me pause because, yes, we may not agree with the why of someone else. It might be, for example, that a person is highly avaricious and their entire why is about making money or attaining power. So a few things to say about that. Certainly a why like that's going to, drive people. And I've worked with probably thousands of highly successful people, and their problem is they're so driven by one particular why that they're ignoring what I would suggest are more important whys in their life.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's another overlapping question here is which whys are wise? Why W-I-S-E, that is a four-letter word, right? And my opinion is, that there's a self-evidency to social connection and compassion and fairness and, altruism and gratitude and so on, that there are some whys that more reliably lead to happiness. So that big study, that longitudinal study, the longest ever done at Harvard, its single shining, incontrovertible result shows that by far the largest predictor of human happiness is the quality of one's relationships. So I think having a why built around that is going to take you to places that are far more salutary in the end than a why that's simply about winning or power, right? But living without a why is bad. Not having a sense of a purpose behind all our activity, we end up finding life meaningless. And just on that, an observation about the current sort of malaise. The thing that disturbs me the most about it is that, it's a little bit, that I felt this after my friends came back and said no one wants to talk about it. And this is this sense of helplessness and hopelessness and passivity that I think that's the most destructive element of what's happening. People feel overwhelmed. They feel heavy is the phrase I've heard a lot. And I think if there was one thing that would come out of this podcast series, it would be encouraging people to act. It can be acting for the community, but it can also be, it's to move into action rather than to fall back into a sort of dismay and despair, mm-hmm. right? And again, the why is important there, Terry, I think. And by the way, hopefully this is not vain or egotistical on my part. I think this particular podcast series, it's based on something, it's based on research, it's based on science. And there is a why here. And there is cause for optimism, what I call realistic optimism, that if we do these things, the world will look different to us. Or we'll have a way of holding the reality of the world in a way that's more productive and less destructive. And that's really the message I hope that this series is going to be taken by people.
I think that's why we do this series, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. You mean the whole project or this particular series?
Everything.
Yeah, I agree. This is why we call it psychology to live by, right? It's like there is some... Yeah, I mean, like I'm not saying everything I say is right, and the science is not going to, disprove some things, but it's a better shot at things than, what I read on social media, for example.
Yeah.
All right, my friends. I think that's. I'm glad you liked this particular podcast. It took quite a lot to write.
I think all three have, anyone who listens to them will end up with a good set of tools, with things to think about.
Yeah.
And allow them to maybe look at it differently.
And the starting points aren't high lift. It can be as simple as like noticing the stars when you walk outside at night.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or thanking someone explicitly for a kindness they gave you.
That's right.
That's what struck me in writing this. There were so many ways actually to build equanimity. And as you say, that most of them aren't big lifts. And I think it's a kind of practice, a kind of discipline, a kind of remembering to do things. All right, my friends, excellent. I'm not sure what the next podcast is going to be on, but I know that I'm going to have to write one soon. So all suggestions welcomed, and we'll be talking again soon, discussing whatever that topic is going to be. You've been listening to the Psychology to Live By podcast. If you'd like to know more, my website is www.drchris.life, and click on the videos tab to find links to all my social media. And if you like the podcast, tell people that you like, so they can like it too.